Hello and welcome back to another Beaver Brew Day. As promised and you guys voted, we are doing a full grain, not a bourbon. Why is it not a bourbon? Number one is you cannot make bourbon outside of America. So this is technically an all grain whiskey and not a bourbon. So yeah, but we are using the bourbon mash bill, meaning at least 51% corn, and then we are going to be aging it on a new charred oak barrel. Now let's get into the ingredients. To start off with, we have some beautiful malted barley. We have crushed the barley, all ready to be mashed in. So after the malted barley, this is going to comprise 20% of the recipe. We have some wheat. So the wheat has also been crushed, and this is not yet ready to be mashed in. I'll explain a bit more now. And then what makes it a bourbon or a corn whiskey is the fact that 51% of the mash bill is corn. So what we have here is 4.1 kilograms of crushed yellow corn. So when you want to start your recipe, you need to first get water on the boil. So I normally use my boiler of my still to get roughly 35 liters on the boil. And then what I'm going to do is I'll bring it down to strike temperature. Now if you want to know what strike temperature is, it is just basically the water temperature that you need to add to your grains to get it down to the point where your alpha amylase starts working. Okay, so if you want to know more about that, I'll link a video here where I did another all grain recipe, and you can see all the steps involved. But now, before we get into the whole mash in, we need to gel the grains. When you buy grain from your local brew shop, the grains have been pre-gelled, meaning they have been either steamed or cooked to release the starches. This is normal chicken feed, and that there is normal whole wheat that I bought that was not gelled yet. So I need to gel them. Now how you gel them is you will be cooking them either in a cereal cooker or a pressure cooker for about making a big ass mess. So you'll be cooking it in a cereal cooker for about 25 minutes or a pressure cooker for about 25 minutes. Now I do not have a pressure cooker big enough to dunk these bad boys in and allow them to get all cooked. I will be cooking them the normal method. So they'll be going into a big ass pot and cooked for an hour. So two things you need to check out for when you are cooking your grains or making them gel or serializing them or whatever you want to call it is number one, dough balls. Make sure you do not have dough balls. But a dough ball is a dry clump of your grains. Now it doesn't matter how long you cook it for or how long you mash it, the liquid will never penetrate into the grains because the starch forms a waterproof barrier around it, and yeah, then you just don't have efficiency. Another question that I get often is, do you need to gel your grains or cook your grains beforehand? If you want a good conversion and actually utilize your grains to the maximum, yes, you need to cook them beforehand. But as I said, if you buy it from a local brew shop, you do not have to gel your grain. The gel process has finished up, so our corn has turned into a nice thick gelatinous mass. So that means that all the starches, or at least most of the starches, has been cooked out and they are ready to be mashed in. So next up, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my corn, I'm going to put my corn in, I'm going to put my wheat in. I then will test the temperature to see if I need to add hot or cold water. I've got pre-boiled hot water that I let cool down right over there, and then I have hot boiling water in my mash or in my kettle at the back there. I will alternate between these two up until I get to the temperature where I can add my malted barley. The malted barley likes between 64 to 70 degrees, so we are aiming for roughly 66 to 67 degrees within that ballpark to see that we can add our malted barley. And then what we're going to do is close the lid up and let it convert. Okay, with the temp sitting at 70 degrees, we can now safely pitch our malted barley. So please do not add your malted barley in the beginning when you are playing around with the temperatures. Get your temperature stable to about 70 degrees, then you add your malted barley and you can bring the temperature up again, but do not add it to the very hot mash. You will burn off all your alpha and beta amylase and you will not convert your starches to sugar. So time to add our malted barley. So with a royal mess all made here, what we're going to do now is we're going to jam on the lid quickly so the temperature stops escaping. And yeah, what you should be left with is a nice thick soupy starchy mixture. Once you put the lid on and you leave it for 90 minutes, the starches will convert into sugar, and then we will sparge and get all the nice sugar water into our fermenters. Let's do that. So at 90 minutes elapsed, the alpha and beta amylase has gone to work and turned that thick starchy mess into a nice liquidy, sugary, sweet water that we can now drain off and convert into alcohol. Now it's time to sparge that bag. So we allowed it to drain. I ringed it out. Yes, brewers out there that's making beer, it might cause astringency, but for us in the whiskey, we're going to distill it, so it doesn't really matter to us. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill this bucket about a third of the way, maybe a bit more, with some room temperature water that has been boiled and sterilized and all the other stuff. And then I'm just going to dunk that whole bag in there, lift it up again and wring it out again into this here. And I'm going to repeat that process a couple of times to get as much of that sugary water out of the grains as possible, because these grains still has a lot of sugary water in it. Hey everybody, just popping in here real quick while Paz Beaver is making a mess while sparging. Just want to remind everybody of the community still that we're in the process of building. Now this still will be built entirely out of the community suggestions and the polls that we will be using to narrow down what we're going to do with the still. The first poll is already up. We are deciding the size of the boiler. So head over to the community page real quick and put your vote down on what size we are going to be making the boiler. A little bit of extra incentive for anybody that sends in a suggestion or sends in anything that we're going to use on the still. Your name will be engraved into the still for all eternity, and we will be using the still on the channel. Let's now go back to Paz Beaver and see how big of a mess he made while sparging. Okay, so with this tea bag method, you're making a royal big mess with this large volume of grain. I really need to think of a better way to do all grain mashes, especially if I want to do it on tabletop. Normally you do it on the floor and it's easy to pick up the stuff, but yeah, open to any suggestions. Sparging finished, we sparged out to 30, maybe 35 liters, I don't know exactly, we'll see now when I transfer it into my fermentation buckets. The reason why we over sparged this is I wanted to get a little bit more volume out of the grains that I used, because yeah, there's excess sugars in there that I don't want to throw away, and I just want to use as much of it as possible. So the recipe is intended to sparge out to 20 liters, and like I said, we ended up with about 30 to 35, not 100% sure. So yeah, before we carry on and get these babies into our fermentation jugs, buckets, not jugs, I just want to test the gravity real quick and see if I made a mistake to sparge to 30. There we go. So on the hydrometer, this water is still nice and warm, so to account for that, we should be sitting on about a 1050 or a 1.050 on our hydrometer, and that will give us roughly 8% ABV. Now 8% ABV, 30 liters, that should be a decent run. What we're going to do now is quickly transfer all of this wort to our fermentation buckets. No, we are not going to boil. The reason we are not boiling is I want to carry as much flavor of this wort over as possible. So by boiling it in the boiler there, we would boil away some of those flavors that we do not want. So we want to put this in straight into our bucket. If you were making a beer, you would have to boil it to prevent any infections and that type of stuff from happening. But we're not going to do that today. So let's get transferring. Dit de laatste keer seker gemaak het dat mors. We ended up with closer to 40 liters than 35 or 30 liters. So yeah, my maths sucked tonight. Both of these are now at pitching temp, and the yeast we will be using is the Bootleggers tequila and brandy yeast. The last time I used this yeast, it chewed through the sugar so fast that I was scared that this yeast is going to eat the bucket. So yeah, what we're going to do now is we're just going to dry pitch the yeast. I'm not going to rehydrate or anything, just dry pitch it straight into these buckets, get the lids on, wrap them in a blanket, and hope that the temperature stays constant, or else I'm going to have to bain-marie both of these and yeah, get them to ferment out. So let's get our yeast in. Yeast is in, time to put the lids on. Before I do that, just want to thank everybody for sticking around, and hope you enjoyed me messing up my whole work area and getting half the water on the floor, other half on my shirt, and about a third into the bucket. So yeah, like I said, thank you for sticking around to the end. As always, thank you very much and have a lacquer day.